But first, now that the dust has settled, there are some pretty big lessons for the Liberal Party from its South Australian election trouncing, not just for them, but for the looming federal race. But quite honestly, lessons for the party's very survival if they want to win and hold government. Essentially, this was a relatively left-wing Liberal government up against relatively right-wing Labor opposition. It was a Liberal government that ticked all the socially progressive boxes, sponsoring late-term abortion laws, promoting ever more renewables at the expense of baseload power, and scrapping the V8 supercars in favour of a new zoo and more cultural precincts. Now, thanks to its pro-business outlook, yes, the economy had improved, unemployment had fallen, and new businesses were being attracted to what had once been a Rust Belt state where young people of talent had to pack up and leave if they wanted a job. But up against a charismatic Labor leader without scary social policies and claiming to be pro-business as well, this wasn't enough. That's despite the fact that Peter Malinauskas, the now new Premier, was the previous Labor Health Minister. Part responsible for the new Adelaide hospital disaster, Labor was able to make ambulance ramping a key issue, despite all of that, and a symptom of the government's general inability to get on top of issues. So a one-term Liberal government lost, meaning Labor will have governed South Australia for 20 out of the past 24 years. Now, when you look around the country at entrenched long-term Labor governments in Victoria and Queensland, at Labor's smashing victory in WA, and at the Liberals' wobbles in New South Wales, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that Labor is becoming the natural party of state government, even though they're not much good at it. Bloated health bureaucracies, teacher union-dominated schools, left-wing policing, and anti-development planning policies that make it near impossible to get anything built, whether it's new roads, new housing estates, urban infill, or, God forbid, build a dam. But as a Labor insider said to me recently as I was interviewing him for my upcoming election documentary, we mightn't be much good at government, he said, but we're brilliant at the politics. Well, election after election shows that he's right. And against these moderate, so-called modern Liberals that don't seem to stand for much and lack clear policies that make them any different from Labor, why would voters change? I mean, if the choice is Labor on the left or left-leaning Liberals, it's much of a muchness, isn't it? Probably the biggest lesson here for Liberals across the country is that you don't beat Labor by being Labor-lite. If voters have a choice between a big spending, politically correct Labor Party and an only slightly less politically correct and almost equally big spending Liberal Party, it seems that they go for the party that's wholehearted, boots and all in, for more intrusive, bigger government than its paler imitation. To win, the Liberal Party must have product differentiation from Labor. That's what John Howard had. That's what Tony Abbott had. That's what Malcolm Turnbull lacked, lost 14 seats. And that's what Stephen Marshall didn't have on Saturday night in South Australia. And that looks like being a big problem for Scott Morrison going into the federal poll unless something big changes, something emerges quickly, perhaps from next week's budget. So far, the government's key policies are net zero by 2050 and nuclear subs by 2040. And Labor said me too to both of them. Last time the PM had Labor's scary new taxes on retirees and investors and Labor's job-destroying emissions reduction target to fight against. This time he won't have these. So he's got to create a contest on something else. What that is isn't yet clear because he shied away from potential options like nuclear power and a Ferdinand fight on school standards and the curriculum. But whatever Scott Morrison chooses, it's got to be big. It's got to be audacious. It's got to drive the left right off the deep end and force Albanese to defend an issue where his hard left instincts will be at odds with Middle Australia. Now, to date, Albanese has been the master of the small target strategy, but also the small target media strategy as well. Picture opportunities and doorstops with a whole bunch of junior journalists in the suburbs at country towns. That's a long way away from a much tougher Canberra press gallery. Indeed, it's telling, isn't it, that ever since the Kimberley Kitching bullying claims hit the media, Albanese's done only 2 press conferences in 7 days. Saturday on the New South Wales Central Coast, and last Wednesday in Queensland. 2 in 7 days, from the bloke that was elbow everywhere only a couple of days ago. And there's another thing too. The Liberal Party can't afford to keep taking traditional Conservative voters for granted, or it will lose them. And with them, lose government. It's the reason Marshall lost, burning off Conservative voters with left-wing policies, forcing Conservative MPs onto the crossbench, and trying to deregister hundreds of Conservative Christian members from his Liberal Party. Scott Morrison, well, he hasn't exactly kept the Conservatives close either. Christian Porter's retiring from the Parliament, Alan Tudge has been banished from Cabinet, and his New South Wales factional lieutenant, Alex Hawke, so keen to block Democratic pre-selections and save his own skin, that the Libs still don't have candidates in a number of key New South Wales seats. And we're just a couple of weeks out, aren't we, from the election being called. Moving to the left hasn't stopped so-called Voices candidates challenging Liberals in rich inner-city seats, but it has fuelled outbreaks on the right, from the revived Liberal Democrats, the cashed-up Palmer Party, as well from Pauline Hanson, that'll make it so much harder to hold regional seats. Now, make no mistake, with Anthony Albanese struggling to get his alleged mean girls under control, the federal election could still go either way. But the less the Morrison government looks like a paler echo of Labor, the stronger its chances will be.